Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a development that has left the world stunned and raised new fears across Europe. Reports have emerged that drones launched from Poland, or at least appearing to originate from Polish territory, have struck Russia's iconic $1.2 billion Moscow city towers. The attack has sparked immediate questions. Was this really Poland, or is it a new front in the Russia-Ukraine war? And more importantly, does this mark the terrifying possibility of NATO being pulled directly into the conflict? The Moscow skyline lit up in flames once again, and this time, the implications are far larger than just shattered glass. When the first explosion ripped through the towers, Muscovites were jolted awake by the familiar thunder of drones and fire. But the narrative surrounding this strike was different. Russian state media quickly claimed that the drones had come from across the western border, from Poland, accusing NATO territory of harboring or enabling the attack. Footage showed fire licking the sides of skyscrapers, glass raining onto the streets, and terrified residents rushing into the night. Within minutes, hashtags like #NextUkraine began trending across global social platforms, fueling speculation of a dangerous escalation. In Moscow, the Kremlin wasted no time framing the event as an assault not just by Ukraine, but by NATO itself. Officials thundered accusations, demanding explanations from Warsaw while simultaneously vowing revenge. "This is no longer just a special military operation," one Russian spokesperson declared, his voice shaking with rage. "This is a direct attack on the Russian Federation by those hiding behind NATO's shield." The rhetoric was fiery, designed to ignite patriotism and fear, but behind closed doors, even Russian generals seemed rattled by the implications. In Warsaw, officials moved quickly to deny the accusations. "Poland has not launched any drones into Russian territory," the government stated firmly, calling the claim absurd and accusing Moscow of fabricating lies to justify escalation. Yet the denials did little to calm the storm. Analysts pointed out that whether or not Poland was involved, the strike had given Russia an excuse to paint NATO as an aggressor, shifting the psychological battlefield as much as the physical one. For Ukrainians, the moment was bittersweet. On one hand, the strike had once again shown that Russia's capital could be pierced, that even the heart of Moscow wasn't safe. On the other, the fear that Russia could use this incident to drag NATO into the war weighed heavily. Ordinary Ukrainians, huddled in shelters during nightly missile raids, worried that the Kremlin's narrative might spiral out of control and bring even greater destruction down upon them. Global reactions were swift and divided. Washington and Brussels issued cautious statements, reaffirming that NATO had no direct role in the strike, while condemning Russia's reckless accusations. At the same time, think tanks buzzed with concern that Moscow might deliberately escalate tensions with Poland to test NATO's resolve. Television anchors across Europe posed the same chilling question. Was this a pretext for Russia to expand the war beyond Ukraine's borders? On the streets of Moscow, fear mingled with confusion. Some residents cursed Ukraine and NATO, repeating the state media's claims. Others, scrolling through uncensored clips online, wondered if this was simply another case of Russia's leadership twisting the truth to cover their own military failings. For the people caught in the middle, the explosions were all too real, no matter who was behind them. Military experts noted the symbolism of the strike. The Moscow city towers, gleaming monuments of wealth and power, had once again been scarred by fire. If Ukraine was behind it, it was a continuation of their campaign to show Russia's vulnerability. If Russia's accusations were false, it was still an effective tool for propaganda, redirecting anger outward toward NATO instead of inward at Moscow's crumbling defenses. Either way, the towers had become more than buildings. They were now battlegrounds in both reality and perception. In Kyiv, officials treaded carefully. They neither confirmed nor denied involvement, but privately, some celebrated the chaos the strike had caused inside Russia's leadership. To them, every drone that pierced Moscow's defenses was another crack in the image of invulnerability Putin tried so desperately to maintain. Yet they also knew the risks of being drawn into a larger confrontation they could not control. As night fell, smoke still curled above Moscow's skyline, and the world waited nervously for Russia's next move. Was this merely another dramatic episode in the grinding war, or was it the first spark of a wider firestorm that could engulf Europe? For now, one thing was certain. The strike had shaken Moscow, rattled NATO, and reminded the world that the line between localized war and global conflict was growing thinner by the day. By the following morning, Russian state television had doubled down on the accusations against Poland, running dramatic footage of the burning towers side by side, with maps showing flight paths allegedly traced back to NATO territory. Anchors spoke in grave tones, warning that foreign hands were now directly guiding attacks on the Russian heartland. The narrative was clear. This wasn't just Ukraine anymore. Moscow wanted its people and the world to believe the West itself had crossed the line. In Warsaw, the government scrambled to calm its citizens. Military patrols were visibly increased along the eastern border. Jets roared overhead in a show of vigilance. And Polish leaders appeared on live broadcasts, reassuring the nation that they were not about to be dragged into a direct conflict with Russia. But the sense of unease was impossible to shake. Families stocked up on essentials, air raid drills were quietly reinforced in schools, and whispers of "Are we next?" echoed through the streets. Across Europe, NATO allies convened emergency discussions behind closed doors. The question on everyone's mind was simple yet terrifying. If Russia struck back at Poland under the pretense of retaliation, would Article 5, NATO's collective defense clause, be triggered? Diplomats urged caution, military planners reviewed contingencies, and intelligence officers scoured data for proof of the drone's true origins. But certainty remained elusive, and the fog of war thickened. On the ground in Moscow, cleanup crews worked to erase the damage, sweeping glass from sidewalks and patching shattered windows with makeshift coverings. Yet no amount of repair could erase the fear that lingered. Conversations in cafes and crowded subway cars circled back to the same theme. If drones could keep hitting Moscow, and now with accusations of NATO involvement, what future awaited the city? The skyscrapers, once symbols of strength, now loomed as reminders of vulnerability. For Ukraine's fighters, the development was both inspiring and worrying. The strike had shaken Russia's confidence and once again brought morale to Ukrainian troops who endured endless shelling. But the Kremlin's effort to drag Poland into the narrative carried risks that even hardened soldiers could not ignore. "We want to win this war," one Ukrainian commander was quoted as saying, "but not at the cost of Europe burning with us." In Washington, leaders weighed their words carefully. Publicly, they reiterated that NATO had no role in the attack. Privately, Pentagon officials expressed concern that Moscow might fabricate additional evidence to justify retaliatory action. The idea of Russia deliberately provoking Poland wasn't dismissed as paranoia. It was discussed as a real possibility, one that demanded constant surveillance and rapid response planning. Meanwhile, Russian citizens far from Moscow reacted with a mix of resignation and dread. Some expressed anger at the government for failing to protect the capital, while others clung desperately to the state's narrative that NATO itself was now the aggressor. Whatever their beliefs, one truth was shared. The war had entered a new and dangerous phase, and ordinary lives were caught in its undertow. At the United Nations, diplomats traded sharp words. Russia demanded international condemnation of Poland, while European delegates accused Moscow of manufacturing lies to justify escalation. The chamber buzzed with tension, each statement widening the rift between East and West. Observers noted the chilling undertone. The language being used was not the language of peace, but of prelude. For Moscow's elite, the strike cut deeper than pride. Many owned luxury apartments or offices in the very towers, now blackened by fire. Their illusion of security, the belief that wealth could insulate them from the consequences of war, crumbled in a single night. Some quietly transferred assets abroad, others moved families out of the country. But all of them understood what the government would not say aloud. The fortress walls were cracking. As the week closed, smoke still lingered in Moscow's financial district, and fear still hung in the air across Europe. Whether the drones had come from Ukraine, Poland, or somewhere in between mattered less than the perception they had created. Russia claimed NATO's hand was exposed. NATO denied it. Ukraine stayed silent. And the rest of the world, watching the flames flicker against Moscow's skyline, wondered if this was not just another strike, but the first tremor of a wider war waiting to erupt.